Awesome. While we wait for everyone to come in here, why don't you just give us a little quick preview of your latest SaaS that you just created, which is the Figma to Bubble converter. Can you show us that real quick?
Yeah, so let me share my screen here. All right, so now I have, okay, I can see both my pages here. Design is a Figma to bubble converter. And
Yep.
there's two parts to it. So you have the Chrome extension where you open it up. Oh, closed it. There it is. So this is where you retrieve the designs that you converted from Figma. And then in Figma, let me put that over here. There is it's under development mode. So if you've never used Figma, once you add the plugin, you just have to toggle dev mode right here. And then you should probably land and inspect. And then you just have to click over the tag of plugins. And then you'll see the design one if you've installed it. And I've already added my token in here, so it's authenticated me. But if you don't have a token, just go to design.io and sign up. And basically what you do is then I have a Figma file pulled up. You can select whatever design you want and then convert it to bubbles. I had this one ready to go, and this is just a login page. And there's a couple other things that you might want to do. Figma doesn't let you say what is an input, what is a button. So I've added a functionality for now that's just renaming the elements. You add an emoji to it, but I'm working on a new functionality where you can just do it in the plugin itself. But let's just convert this input field right here, and I'll rename it to be the
this normally takes so much time. Like we literally have to block out hours in our studio to say, hey, it's going to take us 4 hours to convert this from Figma into Bubble. So if you can do this much quicker, I think you will save a lot of people a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was actually the main genesis of this idea. Was I have in my team at Mashari Method, we have a full-time developer who does or a designer who does all designing, and then I sit there and I just convert it nonstop. And I was like, man, I hate doing this. It's just not flexing my bubble muscles. It's monotonous work. But here we go. So I renamed the two input fields to be input fields, and I'll click convert to bubble, and it's already done. And if we switch over here, it just got created. So desktop and created on today, and I haven't used this one yet. So I'll click copy and I'll paste it in here. And there we go. So this is the design from Figma, put it over. And if you click on the element, you can see that this is an input field, right? And then a lot of Figma designs will put like max width. So I'll just remove this from here.
And I think what the special thing here with your Chrome extension is that you need to also use emojis to signify if it's like an input, if it's a search box, right? Because when you go in Figma to Bubble, Figma doesn't know, or Bubble doesn't know if that's an input or that's a button kind of thing, right?
Exactly, yeah. In Figma, you just put a group basically and drop a text and you say, hey, this is the input field, right? And then the developer just works off of that. But yeah, you can see here, I could enter my email and it works. So you'd have to set up your workflows, obviously, because that's not in Figma, but it does that for you. And then another cool one is for this demonstration, where is it? I copied Apple's landing page into Figma, and
nice.
I apologize if my Figma skills aren't the best, but let's convert that. So you can see here, it's 328 individual elements. So that's 328 times you have to uncheck fixed width when you drop something into Bubble, right? And if I open it up, I see right there, 1280. That was the title of it. I can click copy and paste. There we go. It pops it in there. And just for reference, let's pull up Apple's landing page, right? And if I click preview, the one thing here you'll notice is that I don't convert the images because, and let's remove fixed width from this.
That fixed width and all the little things that you just have to uncheck every time. It gets you.
It gets you. So the main thing is I don't convert the images just because I would have to self-host them. I am going to do that soon, but I just pushed that off for the side. But you can see here that it converted the footer. So if we scroll here to Apple's landing page, it did a really good job converting it. And I actually have the images. I manually added them over before this call.
Maybe you can do some kind of Cloudflare with the API key and say, hey, add your own API key, and then it's just going to host it automatically thing.
Ooh, that's a good idea. Yeah. That way I don't have to pay for the image.
That way you don't have to pay for it. Right.
But yeah, you can see here, like once I added the image URLs, like you scroll down to it, it looks pretty good.
So
hopefully people find value in it, and I'd love any feedback about it.
Cool. Awesome. It's 3:09. Thanks for those tuning in today. Beck is a very special guy. A lot of people don't know how talented he is, but he's just very talented. Not only with Bubble, but in many other ways. He flies under the radar, which he probably means to. But I appreciate, Beck, you coming on today to show us some of these skills. He's been creating a lot of things. He's like, hey, JJ, is this Slack app cool? Or, hey, I could totally... What was the other idea that you had that we're just like...
Dude, there's so many.
There's
I
too
probably
many.
ping you all the time with random ideas. I don't even remember how many I've sent you.
There was too many. You had one the other day that were just like, this is obviously a whole new idea. But
the Notion one, I think.
The Notion to blog, right? And so you created this thing where you create your blog in Notion, which is your CMS, and then it just exports it to Bubble. And then you do it in an HTML fashion. So like when you load it in Bubble, it's like super quick, great lighthouse scores, all that kind of stuff. So always hacking together fun little things, usually Bubble primarily. And this is just one of those things. And what is like a Slack app? Because what I normally thought was, all right, we are making something where you could just ping notifications, right? And you can already do that with Zapier and some other things, but we're going beyond that today. So give us a little bit more about that, Beck.
Yeah, and first off, thanks for the kind introduction. You were too kind, JJ. Regarding Slack apps, in Slack you can create Slack bots via either Zapier. You could even put together an API call from Bubble. And Slack itself also has a workflow builder. If you want to do completely no code, you could do it right through the app. But then there's Slack apps. So Slack apps they can be either extensions of your solution that provides you a UI in Slack for your users to use your solution, or it could be a full-fledged standalone thing.
We see that Google Drive integration into Slack, right? Mm-hmm. Like you share something via Google Drive and then it hits you back in the Slack app of, do you want to share permissions or update the permissions? That's what we're thinking of, like a Slack app, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So you can connect your Google Calendar and then you connect the Zoom Slack app and you could have you could get a notification in Slack and join your meeting through there, right? So all kinds of ones. And if you want, I could show you the more complex ones that I've built.
Okay.
And we could do a quick deep dive on that first.
Sure. Let's do it.
All right. Let's do it. All right. So, JJ, this is the one that I added you to earlier.
Okay.
And this one is the one that I've been working on at my company. I'm Shara Method. So this is our Slack app. So you can see here under apps, I have it added here. And this is a tool for us to manage actions, tasks, provide an update on the status of all our stuff. You could click on
kind of like a real-time feed, and then you actually have buttons. And now what happens when you click one of those buttons?
So all your Slack apps UI lives under this home tab, right?
Okay.
So think of the home tab as a single page application in Bubble. And then you have to add all of these components here. And every time you click a button, Slack is weird where you have to schedule or you have to tell them that they need to change the look of the app each time something happens. So each time you click a button, you have to send the whole UI all over again to the user who clicked that button. So each time I click, for example, profile, there's a second delay because Bubble's receiving the notification that I click profile and then it's sending the entire profile UI to me as the user. But here, let's say I want to create an action, right? So I'll click action and the pop-up opens up. So you can have pop-ups, you can have workflows, reminders, whatever. And I can say, ask JJ if he wants to grab lunch today, right?
Korean barbecue.
Korean BBQ. Banchan. So I click submit and there's a second delay here, but I want to show an integration where it's Bubble, Slack, and OpenAI, where it connects. I create a workflow that pings OpenAI for a function call and says, hey, you can see here now I got a message, right? And I click on that in a second, but it's the function calls. I trained the OpenAI model to recognize what is an action that it itself can do. Okay. So if I click on it, it says, hey, Beck, I saw that you created this action. Ask JJ if he wants to grab lunch today. JJ, you're a member of my workspace. So it's saying, hey, do you want me to do that for you? I was like, hey, just removing that mental workload of messaging JJ. And I'm like, yeah, let's do it. So I'll click yes. And it's going to create a channel for us. And JJ, it added you in here. And it says, hey, Beck. Or it says, hello, JJ. Beck asked me if you want to grab lunch today. So the possibilities with Slack apps are endless. It's another place for you to place your organization's UI into the hands of where most people live. I always have Slack pulled up when I'm working. So I was like, hey, this makes perfect sense.
I immediately think of it and like in terms of like agency stuff, like if you have clients in an internal Slack channel and like they want to submit like a new task for you to work on or a bug request, and it's just like, here's this thing, and then you like submit it or whatnot. I think there's a lot of ways that you can do this to really gain value in it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just like creating a whole new application, right? It's your own imagination is the endpoint.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Let's get into it. Let's start building this thing. What do we need to do? Let's think about the broader picture here. What is actually happening? We have to create an application in Slack itself, like the Slack directory, right?
Yeah. So we start with telling Slack, hey, I want to create an app. And then you create the app, and then you start connecting your API endpoints so that Slack knows where to tell you when something happens, right? So let me reshare my screen and we will jump into the building. So we'll go over here, and so we'll post a link to this. I've typed up the entire instructions step by step. Like I even had my wife try to do it, and she was like, "Oh yeah, this is easy." Because like I wrote this because I always forget things, and I was like, I really don't want to forget how to do this because every time I have to remember, it's just such a pain in the butt. So there's step one, where's the intro, and it just explains. And so this is the Notion integration. It's all on Bubble, but I typed this blog post up in Notion, and then I just converted it over to HTML that Bubble can better understand, right? We're going to skip through this really because this is more so just light reading on what are Slack apps. We already went over that. Some of the key terms you need to know. And actually, I'll touch on this real quick. There's two major
Do you want to actually throw this URL in the chat?
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. So
cool. If anyone else wants to follow along with us, they could do that too.
And can I post it in here, or do I have to post it
maybe Slack it to me real quick. No, you're sharing the screen. Whatever you feel comfortable with. Where we at?
Let me just stop sharing screen and I'll Slack it to you.
Okay.
I'll send it to you in your workspace.
Yeah, so the doc that he's getting ready to send us, it's a step-by-step guide in that way too. So if you can't follow along in the video, you can have this doc to follow along with after the fact, so you can still accomplish this and create anything you want with it. But we're saying that we need to first create an application in Slack itself. And then we also create an application in Bubble. And then we set up API calls between the two along with some webhooks so the two can communicate with each other.
That's exactly it, yeah.
Cool.
So did you get the link that I sent you in your Slack?
Yep, I got it.
Okay, perfect. Coming back to the events and interactions. When I was first building this, I got so confused with what is an event and what is an interaction. And I've linked the Slack documentation so you can take a look at it, and it will confuse you even more. But the best way to look at it is events are predetermined by Slack, things that Slack always captures, right? And interactions are items you tell Slack that you want captured for your application specifically. So an example of an event is every time you add an emoji reaction or join a channel, whatever, that is an event in Slack. However, every time somebody does something in your app, click a button or submit a pop-up like a modal, that is an interaction. So that is the two main differentiator. And once we dive very deep into this, you'll understand why it can get confusing pretty fast. So that's events and interactions. We went over what is an app home, right? It's a place for your application's UI to live. And the home tab is really where we're going to be working with here. And then finally, there's block kits in Slack. So let me click this open real quick and I'll show you designing. Actually, let's just go to block kit builder. This is how you build your UIs in Slack. It's like a no-code solution where I could drop in like a markdown text. I could put in buttons, date picker, whatever. And right here is the JSON that Slack provides you. So then you just send this JSON using your Bubble API to Slack every time the user does something that you want them to see that view. Right.
Now, have you included that JSON in your blog article of the guide? If you need to send it? Yeah.
No, this one specifically, no, but the ones that we will build in the guide or in this tutorial is in the guide.
Cool.
That's and I could update the blog to have that.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Yeah. Blocks in Slack are essentially Slack's UI configuration if you wanted to customize your app even further.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like your Bubble's editor. Think of it that way, except there's no workflows.
Cool.
So first up is just creating the application, like you said, JJ. So we'll click, go to this link, and I'll put it on this tab right here, and I'll click create a new app, and then we'll do from scratch, and we'll name it live tutorial, and we'll place it in the one that we've been working on. And there you go. So you've built your app.
Hey,
And then
Beck, I
we'll
think you
scroll
can
down.
bring your one screen full screen and
Okay.
minus out the blog if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So let's do screen.
It's just a little bit small on our side. Cool.
All right. So I'll work completely
Perfect.
out of this one, and then I'll have the blog on the other side. So next up is I'm on chapter 2 now, where it's setting up your bubble backend to handle events, right? So we just created this, but this does nothing yet. Somebody clicks on it, it won't work. So first up, we'll set up events. So we'll go over to here and we'll find
And
events.
we are within the Slack API right now, configuring our Slack app, specifically the Slack events.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
we'll toggle events on. So this will let us know. This will have Slack send us a notification every time somebody opens our application, right? So opening an application is a predetermined event in Slack.
Okay.
And now it's asking for a URL. And now we'll create our backend workflows. I'll
Cool.
create a new folder for this live demo. And I will create a new API workflow.
You're in your bubble app right now?
Yeah, am I not showing that one?
No, it's just still on the Slack one. It's all good.
Let's do window then.
Yeah, Windows probably be good. So you were
There we
saying
go.
that you went into your bubble app and then went into your backend workflow where you can create a public endpoint.
Exactly. So I
Cool.
will name this API workflow Slack Actions Endpoint 1 because I already had that one created.
While you do
And
this, I'm just going to
mhm,
say for the public endpoint here, you see how he has that little checkbox clicked? That actually makes it so public applications can find it and target it, right? You need this if it's going to be any kind of public facing workflow like Beck is doing. But if it's not a public facing workflow, don't check that box. When I do all my bubble audits, I see way too many people checking that box, ignoring privacy rules, ignoring authentication. Like those checkboxes are there for your security. So if this is like an internal workflow, don't check that box because it will expose it
yeah,
publicly, and you don't need to do that.
no, yeah, very good call out. And it's funny you say that because when I was first building this for development side, like way back when, I had this unchecked just because, hey, I don't need to have this checked. And
Yeah,
then that's why it wasn't working. In this scenario, I need
gotcha.
to expose this public API workflow.
Yep.
And for the point of this demonstration, I'm actually going to break all rules and enable everything just because we're not going to worry about security just because,
Authentication, privacy
yeah,
rules, etc.
exactly.
Yeah,
You can do all of that when you're building your app. And I'll talk more on that in the next post I create, how to secure this. But for now, we're going to check everything. And
cool.
let's see here. And we're going to set parameter definition detect request data because Slack's going to tell us what to look for. And one last thing is we need to include headers in the detected data. So all these checkboxes are very important.
What's the reason for the headers?
So in the headers, Slack tells you what kind of event it is.
Okay,
So this gets really, if you uncheck it, it's fine for this demo. But then once you want to build out more complex functionalities, you won't know what kind of event it is and your workflow just won't make sense.
gotcha.
So in this scenario, we need headers in there.
Okay,
Yeah, for some reason, Slack sends it in the header section. So now I got the detection set. I'll copy the initialize URL and I'll come over here and under request URL, I'll paste it in here. And as soon as I paste it, Slack's going to give me an error saying, hey, this didn't work. And that's actually what we want because when we come back to Bubble, we actually did receive a notification. We got
boom.
the structure, right?
And
So
for you guys that don't know, what Beck is doing right now is he just set up a webhook in Bubble, right? And so he had that public URL. He gave that public URL to Slack with the initialization at the end of it, right? And then Slack pinged the Bubble app, and then the Bubble app is now saying, "Hey, I confirmed that I received that data, and now here's how I'm going to structure that data that I've gotten back in all these different ways." And this also gives you a chance to update the type for each of the data that's being returned. And I think Bubble actually does a really good job at taking all this data, this JSON response, and formatting it nicely for us to then work with.
yeah, absolutely. And you could change it to be whatever you want, right? So
Yeah.
there's going to be scenarios where you want to capture something as a date. You'll be able to change that to a date or a number.
Yeah.
So,
But I think one last note is it's really important. Once you get this webhook initialized, you then need to go back into Slack and update that URL to remove the initialize, because after you get it initialized, it won't work if you still have the initialize at the end of that webhook URL.
exactly. Yeah. That's such a common like when I first started learning Bubble, I was like, why is this not working? It worked the first time.
Yeah. I struggled on that for 5 times before like I finally realized that's exactly what we'll do, and we won't ask questions, we'll just do it.
Yeah. So the next step here, before we remove the initialized URL, is we need to return data to Slack with a challenge code. There is some security, even with us having this all checked on, is that Slack will only do the workflows and functions and talk to your app if you return the token that they sent you in the API workflow, right?
Cool.
So at least you can know that it's coming from Slack and the stuff you send is only going back to Slack.
Okay.
So we're going to click an action that's return data from API.
And I love this action.
Yeah.
It's not a lot of people use this action or even know this action exists, but like this action is really powerful.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what I did here is I said a key of challenge, and that's what Slack's expecting.
Yeah.
And then request as body challenge. And if we click modify token and we're show raw data, here's the challenge token that they sent us. So that's what they are expecting back from the application.
Cool.
So that's set up. So now we can come back to Slack, and all we have to do is, like JJ said, just remove the initialized URL, and then Slack will re-verify. And there we go. So we've set up the initial webhook connection. Next, we need to subscribe to the bot events. So just because you have events enabled doesn't mean Slack's going to send you anything. Now you have to basically add scopes saying, hey, Slack, I want you to send me when X happens, right? And this is important because when a user wants to add your Slack app to their workspace, they're going to consent to these scopes. So you don't want to select all of them, right? So there's stuff like reading channels. You can even read messages. Yeah, that's the crazy part is like there's Slack apps that have scopes that they can read DMs. Be careful what you install. And the one we're looking for is app home opened, because we're building an app home, right? So we want to receive a notification from Slack every time somebody opens our app, because then we will need to send them the JSON payload of the UI that it needs to look like. Okay. So we added that, and then we just have to click Save Changes at the bottom. Cool. And now we need to do some permissions. So we'll click over to Auth and Permissions, and we need to find scopes. Here we go. And we're assigning so you could add permissions at the bot level, which is the Slack app that we created acts as a bot as well. Okay. And then you could assign scopes to the user level. Here, we're only going to do bot level. And the ones we're doing is users read. So we want to know who's in the workspace. We want to know the profile. So I want to know, okay, I get the users. Users read just tells me the unique ID of the user. But I want to know that U1238 is JJ, right? And then users read email and chat write. There we go. So we added those, and then lastly, we need to click install to workspace. And this is us giving permission, right? So this is the approval process that's showing that all your users will see. And you can change the images and all that stuff. Click allow. And then if I bring back up, here we go. Here's the Slack workspace that we're working on. Now we can see that the one that we created live tutorial is an app in our Slack workspace, but it doesn't do anything, and there is no app home, right? So we have the messages in the about tab, but there's no app home because we're not telling Slack what to look for.
Yeah. We have a quick question here. They're saying, how can you go about telling a customer that you need administrative access to the Slack app to edit permissions? I don't think you go into their Slack app. I think you invite them into your Slack app. So think about an agency. Maybe you have an agency central Slack for all of your clients. You bring them in. And so you build this app for your own Slack internally, and you do it that way. Or you maybe do it for your company. You say you have a SaaS solution, you invite them to your company's SaaS solution, that kind of thing. Or how else would you do some kind of external thing back? What is it like? Can you make this app available on like the Slack app store or something like that?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what's going to happen. So right now what we're doing is we're building think of this as the version test of the app, and we're placing it manually in our own workspace so that we can test it before you publish so there's a manage distribution button, right? Yeah. When you click manage distribution, there's all these checklists you have to go through before Slack will let you publish this app to the Slack marketplace. So if you click on Slack app marketplace, there's a whole bunch of apps. Oh, no, that's just a marketplace app. Oh, that's good SEO. But there's all these apps. Think of it like the app store. And once you click publish and Slack approves it, your app will end up on here.
So just like a Chrome extension in that way.
Exactly. Yep. You just have to go through all the steps in there. So JJ, like you said, you'd first build this in your own environment for you to test it. Yeah. And then once it's completed, once you've gotten approval, then you would just send the URL to your client, and you can have it so that it's by private invite, so it's not in the marketplace, and the user has to receive like an email or something or a unique URL to install it. Or you could place it public into the marketplace if you want anybody to be able to download it.
So are you saying, Beck, that we could create our own Slack app for no-code agencies to process communications with their clients and then publish it publicly?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. It's another UI to
Interesting.
your solution.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's pretty mind-blowing. Once you get into it, you're like, holy smokes, I could build anything.
Yeah, you could build anything. I'm like thinking like all the different things you can build now in that way. Very cool. Okay.
Awesome. That we are now done with chapter two in the tutorial. So now we'll build the app home. So like I mentioned, if we go back here, when I click live tutorial, we don't have the home tab that we have here at Mashari AI one because we haven't enabled that. So we'll come back here and we need to go to, where's my notes? We need to go to the app home tab. Oh, it's the first one. There we go. And we need to enable app home. And then we'll go back to auth and permissions. And let's copy our bot token. Here we go. And then we need to go back to the Bubble API, our editor. And now we're going to create an API call to Slack. And this will be because now Slack, in the prior step, we created the webhook for Slack to tell us when a user opened our app home. Now we need to create the API call to tell Slack what to show in the app home. We enabled app home, but now we need to tell them what to show.
Essentially what data you're going to send to it.
Exactly, yep.
Yeah.
So click add another API. We'll name it Slack. We'll do Slack demo 2. Authentication, we're going to do.
We're in the API section, and we might have some beginner bubblers out here. So maybe just as you're creating these APIs, maybe just continue to talk through what it is thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So we create first when you click add another API, that is the grouping of saying, hey, I want to call this external entity, right? So here I'm doing Slack, right? Yeah. So I'm setting my private key for Slack. And then if I wanted to then set up an API connection to OpenAI, for example, I'd do add another API, and I would name this OpenAI, whatever, and I would set up the private key there.
And this is after you've set up like a shared header for this group's underneath of APIs, right?
No, this is before. So this is just the initial structure, and then I would add a call to each grouping of APIs. So you can see here when I created the And for authorization, I'll put the key value here. So first you have to put bearer. Some don't, but some do, or most do. You have to place bearer in there, and then there we go. So we set the authorization, and I'm not worried about this token because I'll delete it after the call. Yeah. We'll click expand, and we have a blank API call to Slack. Actually, it doesn't even know it's
just authenticated yourself with that bearer and that token. You just authenticated yourself as like a user going back to Slack of, hey, I have access to send you this data now. And without that, maybe Slack requires that and they won't accept anything without that.
Exactly. Yeah. And I actually also haven't included the URL, so it's actually not authenticating with anybody yet. We have to then add the URL here, right? Yeah. And there's two ways to create an API call. So this is step one, where I go through each step and I'll just name it. I'd say Slack app home, and I'll go through each of those process, right? But another way, and you'll see it in my documentation, is there's the import another call from curl. And a lot of API documentations, the good ones, will give you a curl script that you could paste into Bubble. It doesn't tell you can paste in Bubble, but it gives it to you as curl. And if you click import, it does most of the work for you. So here it's already pre-populated for me. I just have to change the name. And I'll name this to be...
That's like that one, another one of those little things that like no one talks about, but as soon as you learn about importing the curl, it's just like, dang, that was so much easier. And it's hidden a little bit too. They didn't call a lot of attention to it.
Just look how tiny it is.
Yeah.
It's so small.
Yeah.
And one thing we need to change here is we want to use it as an action. So API calls you can use as data where you want to pull information from an external entity, or you want to use it as an action where you want to do something with it. Since we're posting
now,
to Slack.
Let's talk quickly about the two differences. You talked about action and data, but within the Bubble editor itself, if it's data, that means like when you're setting like a data source, you can get data from data API. You can use that data then in that area. But if you want to actually use the action in like a workflow, then you actually need to mark this as an action. So that way it's a step in the workflow that you can do. Because if it's set up as data, then it won't actually show up as like a thing that you can add to a workflow.
Exactly. Yeah. A good use case for use as data is you could add a repeating group, pull data from a entity that sends you an array of items, and you could display that right in your repeating group.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we set this as action, and then let me just make sure everything else is right. So content type, we're telling Slack that, hey, expect JSON structure. And then this is just the dummy UI that I built for our app home using that block kit builder that we talked about earlier.
Cool.
Right. And then there's the user ID.
And
And
that's all
that's what I need to.
JSON. So you can probably just take that into ChatGPT too and have ChatGPT riff on it a little bit too, right?
Oh, yeah. You know what? Now that you say that, I bet you there's already a GPT. I don't even know what they were
For
calling it
Slack
now.
build bots or
Yeah, like a
whatever.
Slack builder bot. Yeah. That
Yeah.
you could tell it to build you something like that if
Yeah.
GPT-4 already doesn't know it.
Yeah.
But the main thing here is you can see here, I set this to be a body parameter, user ID, because you'll need to do this for each user. So each time a user opens your Slack app, you need to send the user ID to this views publish API endpoint so
Okay.
that Slack knows who should get this updated view, right? And this gives you the ability to show dynamic information for each user, right? To get
Nice.
that, I will find my Slack tab. I'll click on myself, and let's see here.
By the way, your wife seems super awesome for going through this tutorial step by. My wife would never do that. I can't even. She doesn't even want me to talk to her about Bubble and No Code. She just let's talk about other stuff.
Yeah, it's not always common that she'll let me test stuff out on her, but this time around she's all right, whatever. Baby's sleeping. Get on with it.
That's very nice.
So you have to get your own user ID first, right? So what I did was I clicked on my profile here, and then you click the profile button, and this opened up. And then there's these three buttons. You click this three ellipses, and then you click copy member ID.
So
I'm doing
grabbing
this.
Slack user data right now?
Yeah. So what I did right now is I am pulling my unique ID for my user here in this Slack workspace.
Cool.
And I'm doing that just so that I can initialize
the name, the photo, just about
exactly.
it, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a Slack API endpoint called users info where you could pull all of that. You could pull like you said, name, email, anything that you've entered into here.
Yeah.
Like name pronunciation, my local time, all that stuff. So if you want to know what time zone your user's at, you'd be able to pull from Slack. So I added my user ID and I'm going to initialize the call. And there we go. So this is a success message saying it delivered, and I'll click save. And let's check out the Slack app.
By the way, click on here. How did you learn this? Who taught you this?
Dude, hours and hours of trial and error. That's basically what it was.
So your boss was like, hey, let's build a Slack app. And you're just like, yep, I'll figure it out.
Exactly. Yeah. I had a lot of help actually from your Bubble Slack workspace. I remember specifically I was hitting my head up against the wall, and Eli was one of the ones that like chimed in. Is like, hey, this is what you need to do to fix the JSON. And I mentioned this earlier, how I was pulling data from Slack. I didn't have the headers enabled, and the way Slack sent data was different every single time. So it was just such a nightmare. And a lot of it was thanks to your Slack group of Bubble pros who helped me get to this point.
There we go.
But yeah, to get to where we were now, previously only the messages and about tab were visible, but now the home tab's visible, and you can see here you could add GIFs, you could add text, and we go back here, you can see what I did. I have a blocks array, and each block is this one's a section, and this is where I wrote hello world. So if I wanted to, I could say hi JJ and YouTube, and if I reinitialize the call and I come back here, I just have to toggle back out of it. You can see here it updated, right? So that's how you manipulate the UI. It's just simply with JSON. And then now let's go over to making it so that, because JJ, if you click on that app on your Slack side, you probably won't see the app home. You won't, because it's only going to send the information to me, right? So what we need to do now is make it so that you can use it, so that anybody in the workspace that installs this app would be able to use it. And to do that, we have to create another workflow. So we're going to call this one a router workflow. So let's create a new API workflow, and we'll call this.
And why call it a router?
I call it a router because it is going to route interactions to other API workflows. The whole point of this workflow is
like a middleman.
To recognize what type of interaction it was. Is it I'm sorry, this is the events router. So it's for it to recognize what type of event it was. Okay. So in my case, I would do it for app home opened. But let's say I was also interested in an event that a user liked a message in a channel, right?
Mhm.
Then I would create another API workflow, and this router would recognize through a conditional what type of event it was and route the traffic to the appropriate one. So we'll do that, and let me just look at my notes what we need to do here. We're going to enable everything. We're going to do detect request data. And this one's actually going to be the one that we're going to message ourselves. So we're going to use the plugin, API plugin, to trigger this API workflow itself through Bubble. So we're going to get real meta. And
Cool.
we're going to turn on, I need to duplicate my view here. We're going to click detect data. So this API workflow is now in detection mode.
Yep.
I'm going to copy the URL, and then I'm going to come back to plugins in a different tab.
Opening a new tab, and you're gonna self trigger it.
Exactly. Yep.
That's smart. I haven't thought of that before.
Yeah, that way you could manipulate it and control when it kicks off.
Yeah.
All right. I have a call self API name already.
Very smart.
And let's create a new call. We're going to name this Slack Events Router 2. So now this is a demo of actually creating it through the manual process. And we're going to post to that link I just copied. So we're going to call ourselves. And we're going to set the content type to be...
And we're using Bubble because that's what you're used to. But really, anything that can access APIs and process logic can probably do this as well.
Yeah. The
like
initial... Exactly. Yeah. The initial app that I showed, my company's one, I actually use Make for a lot of the routing functionality just because it's much easier and just seems a little more streamlined to do it. But you can do it in Bubble. But yeah, you can do it in anything that lets you route traffic, really, and respond.
Yeah.
And we're going to set the body parameter to be request data. Make it pretty simple on ourselves. And I just need to provide... And I have the JSON that I'm using here in the tutorial. I'm just going to paste it right here. Uncheck private, and then we're going to initialize call. And there we go. So I got a success message saying Bubble received it. We'll click save, and we'll check here. And there we go. So
there it is. Nice.
It received it as well. So we'll click save here. And one more thing we need to do before we remove the initialize URL is we need to initialize it once more, but triggered from Slack. So we're going to come back to our first API workflow. We're already returning data, and now we just need to trigger that API workflow we created in the plugin. I use that term interchangeably, API workflow, because I'm calling this an API workflow, but I'm also calling this an API workflow. So if I'm confusing you, I apologize. And here it is, the Slack Events Router 2. That's the one that I created right here, right? No, I'm sorry. Where am I? Oh, because I had two tabs. Yeah, here we go. So this is the one that we just created, and I want to trigger this API call. So we'll come back here, and we're going to change the body from the placeholder text I was using to be request data's raw body text. So now what we're doing is when an event happens in Slack, Slack's going to send a ping to the Slack Actions endpoint 1. There, we're responding to Slack saying, hey, this is the right entity. Here's your challenge token to let you know that everything's good. Yep. And then after that, we're going to call ourself, which is it's sending that raw body text to that API call that we created in the plugins tab. And we're going to add a conditional here that only do it in a certain scenario. Let's see here. Actually, no, I don't need to add that here. But yes, we're sending that information. So then this call self is going to trigger this router, which is calling our Bubble API endpoint. This one.
Okay.
And okay, so I just now need to redetect the data. So we'll click detect data, and I will come back to Slack. I will exit out of my app and come back. And there we go. So it updated the payload.
Nice.
So now this router has the correct information.
Nice.
So now we can come back here and, before we forget, remove initialize. And that should be good to go. All right, so now we need to set one more step. This is the last step in this demo. We're going to create a custom event. It doesn't even have to be a custom event, but I just want to use a custom event for the scenario.
Sure.
We're going to call this viewspublish.1. So this will be the event that will actually display our UI to the user who clicked the application.
Okay.
And we're going to add a parameter telling the custom event to expect something. And we're going to call it user ID so that it knows who did it, and it will be text. And let's add an action. I'm going to call it Slack demo views publish 2. There we go. And then the user ID will be user ID. And let me make sure I'm not skipping anything. So this is triggering that API call, which ends up triggering this. And we're going to add the custom event, trigger custom event, views publish 1, the one we just created. And user ID will be request status, event users. Actually, yeah, just the event user, because that's the ID. And here we'll add the conditional that I was stumbling on over here. And the conditional will be only when request status event type is app, and you'll have to manually enter this in. It's not going to be something that is.
Gotcha.
Like
so that's one of the things that's like it's case sensitive and whatnot, and you can't spell it wrong or anything like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What I did was, if the event type is app home opened, then trigger this custom event. Okay. So this is where the router will really shine. Is I would populate this with 5 or 6 different events or different custom events, each with its own conditional for each type of Slack event. So this is where I would add, like, somebody add an emoji, that'd be a different custom event to do something else. And now that we have that set up, open Slack demo use publish call.
Now I'm trying to figure out like when this actually fires in Slack. Is it you have to go into the app itself to write something, or is it monitoring channels? How is this actually firing?
Yeah, if we come back to this and we go back to event subscription, we subscribe to a bot event that is app home opened.
Okay.
Every time somebody opens the app homepage, we're going to receive an event from Slack, which will trigger this endpoint. And then that endpoint, like I said, responds to the challenge and then triggers our router to then do whatever custom event it needs to do for its appropriate site.
Okay. So depending on different channels, you can have different events going on?
Exactly. Yeah, different channels, different event types. And like I said, you'll do the same thing. And we're only touching events right now. But you then have to do the same thing for interactions. Like I said, events are predetermined stuff that Slack has said you can create a scope for. But then you create an interaction for somebody clicked a button in my app. Then you'd receive an interaction payload, and you have to set up the same custom events to manage to basically change the UI based on what the user did.
Interesting.
And so the last thing we need to do before we wrap this up is just to update the body of the views publish. So the views publish is what is going to determine the UI that the user is going to get. Okay. So we're going to delete this other one that was pre-built. And this was the one that I had set. And I'm going to update the JSON with the one I copied from my tutorial. And what I did here is I added another user ID, the dynamic body parameter, to say, hey, this is your user ID, to demonstrate that it isn't just opening for me, it's opening for everybody else dynamically. So if I open back up my Slack and I pull this back open, there we go. So now it's saying this. So this is my unique ID in Slack. And JJ, if you open the same thing, you would see your unique ID, right?
Yeah.
And so this is just the teaser of displaying dynamic data.
Cool.
Which is the end of this section 1.
Cool. Man, there's a lot that we could do with this now. Even just the concept itself, very introductionary, but it can really hopefully explore a lot of possibilities for you all, what you might want to do with it, how you might want to create apps to supplement your agency, to create new services, to create new SaaS ideas, things like that. And you don't need to use Bubble. You can use kind of anything that hits that API, processes the logic, listens to webhooks, etc. And the black box of building Slack apps is now opened, and we're good to go. Beck, thank you for that. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on, JJ. And like I said, the first 2 chapters or the first 2 pages of my write-up are live in that link that I sent you. And this week I'll wrap up interactions and I'll post that as well. And that way, at that point, you'll be able to create pop-ups, you'll be able to create input fields, and all that data can then be sent to your bubble so you can store in your database. But yeah, the possibilities are endless. I remember when I was looking into this in 2019, there was a standalone Slack app that was just a task management tool that was making 80K MRR. Yeah, it's like you build a niche thing, there's clients for it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Word, maybe like a little suggestion. It's still hard to visualize some of this. And so in the blog tutorial, maybe if you can eventually make an app public and people could just try it, and then a very simple one of here's what it would be to like before they start to really get them interested, maybe that could be helpful for visual people like me. I'm just like, what exactly? Because it really is powerful, but it takes you a little bit to get there.
Yeah, no, that's a really good idea. I'll definitely add that to the tutorial. I'll create a
Cool.
published application so that
Yeah.
people can look at it, and then I'll enable my demo bubble editor so people can go open it up and just take a look at the API calls and see how I did it.
Cool, cool. And then for all of you watching, yeah, we have a step-by-step blog article that we posted. I'll repost this as well, so you could follow that. Also, I'm going to take this video and then I'm going to repost it, and I'll add Beck's socials. I'll add how you can contact him on Twitter, etc., and other information about design and other stuff and how you can interact with him. But hopefully you all enjoyed it. Beck, thank you so much for making this happen. Really appreciate you for taking the time.
Thanks, JJ. Appreciate you, man.
No problem. And everyone else, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate you guys and your engagement today. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. We'll see you next time. See ya.